Hey, it's syndicated radio talk show host, author, singer Al Cole, welcoming you to another edition of People of Distinction, the talk that gives an in-depth view of some of the most dynamic, intelligent, and successful people on the planet. I come from CBS Radio. My shows are nationally syndicated, and I've helped pave the way to treating women, guys too, with the dignity that they deserve. And I do that with my show, People of Distinction. Treat people with dignity because, boy, I'm aired on the most dignified radio network in the world, one of the biggest, Apple's iTunes radio network. Under their special news talk division, professionally, they air CBS shows, Fox News, NPR, BBC, the whole kit and caboodle that way. And we really love that. Yeah, get a lot of feature for our guests. And at the same time, I have wonderful alliances going with people like Ariana Huffington of the Huffington Post and her Thrive Global Network that draws millions. And coming from CBS Radio, I'm also a New York Times best-selling author with Chicken Soup for the Soul. Chicken Soup for the Soul is distributed by CBS's Simon & Schuster. And also, I have my People of Distinction Humanitarian Awards events. They are national events that I formulated in 2013 in New York City, honoring humanitarian and creative unsung heroes. Go to my website, peopleofdistinction.org. You can check it all out there and see all of the heroes that I've honored since 2013, over 100 of them on peopleofdistinction.org. You can hear my shows on peopleofdistinction.org as well through my Apple stream 24/7. And if you want to email me on anything that I do, you can email me at alcoholic@gmail.com. You heard me right. That's ALCOLEHOLIC@gmail.com. And I really want to thank my CBS radio listeners for coming up with that handle, Alcoholic. We really love that. Alcoholic means that, my CBS radio listeners right from the start dub themselves alcoholics because they say, hey, Al, we love what you're doing there, brother. In fact, we're hooked on it. We are alcoholics. Hey. Coming up, guy who you're going to love too. He's a detective thriller writer. His name is John Patrick Sheehan, and he's written a wonderful detective thriller called Slaughter on Houseboat Row. And we're previewing this on People of Distinction. It's all about, now get this, we love Perry Mason and we love Dick Tracy and people generally like detective thrillers. And they usually have some sort of moral about them. The guy who said that he didn't do it, well, he's the one that did it in the end. And he goes to jail and good triumphs over evil. Okay. Now, John's moral is pretty much the same, but a little bit different. His moral is that, crime doesn't pay. Yeah, we know that. ... But sometimes it does. Whoa! What does John mean by that? Some of you are asking. Hey, well, we're going to have to talk to John about that. And he can explain his moral and a lot of the character development of his detective thriller, Slaughter on Houseboat Row. And he was brought to me by a wonderful book publisher, nationally and internationally, that you got to get to know. If you've got a book that you want to move, hey, move it through this publisher. Link Publishing. They're one of the best, and they give that personal approach too, and you'll love that. Go to linkpublishing.com. Welcome, John, to People of Distinction with Al Cole. It's really a pleasure to have you on today. How are you, John?
Very good, Al. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. And let's talk about it here. You wrote the book. It's a detective thriller, and it's called Slaughter on Houseboat Row. Start to acquaint my listening audience with that. Why Houseboat Row? What's so different about or special about Houseboat Row? And what kind of slaughter are we talking about here, John? Fill us in.
Houseboat Row is now extinct. It was located in Key West. It was a tourist attraction. A hurricane about 15 years ago destroyed it. But it's very quaint. and a lot of characters lived there. Now, why it's set there is one of the unusual characters was an entertainer. She was a guitarist, a singer that worked in the local clubs, and she was very, very popular, and she turned up dead. It wasn't a gaudy scene, more or less. She was fell down and banged her head and died, but the problem with the whole thing was somebody was arrested stealing her equipment and so on. And he was accused of committing the crime. As it turned out, it was a crime. Exactly, her death was not the crime. The crime happened to be the stealing of sunken treasure, which is very permanent around Key West, Florida. And it was pulled off by some very reputable heavy hitters in the town, as well as a few of their criminal cohorts. Bud Roth, a detective who was asked to leave the New York Detective Department because of his tactics, ended up in Key West. And he happened to fall in love with a beautiful lady living on Houseboat Row, who happened to be the mother of the boy, call him boy, who was arrested for the murder. As it turned out, he took it as his personal endeavor to find the killer, which was his expertise. And as he was going from exotic spots to exotic spots, interviewing characters that he suspected might be able to help him in turning up a killer, another body turned up on Houseboat Row. Now, this was of an older gentleman found in a dinghy, just a feet away from the original murder. So it started to complicate a thing for him. It wasn't going the way he thought it would. As he followed his instincts again to change his avenue of approach, he started to realize that there was a lot more there going on. And he endeavored to get to the bottom of it. He did. It took time. When he realized there was some sunken treasure involved with it, the first thing he had to do was to find out who the culprit was. And he did in time, and 2 millionaires turned up as actually billionaires. They turned up as the most ones that would commit this crime. He interviewed both. One he didn't particularly like at all, and he was hoping that would be the one that would lead him to solve his crime. And the other one was a very thoughtful man who had also an interest in what was going on. He interviewed characters, one to hit the bars, barmaids, bartenders, entertainers, and some characters that sold excursions, as they have in Key West, for different attractions in town and out of town, in the Keys and the waters, and some colorful characters. As he went through, he came up against them. He got a few bumps here and there. And he was still treading water until some strange character came into it, who was of Cuban nationality. He he started to show up at different times, and he seemed to give Roth a hand. Roth didn't realize it in the beginning, and then he started to think of him as a guardian angel and wondering where he was coming from and what his interest was. Well, this man was selling tobacco. That was his business. They have a lot of small shops in Key West that roll tobacco leaves and so on for the tourist. And that was his reasonings for being there, as well as other places in the country. But Roth started to realize that this man was around a lot longer than he should have been just for an ordinary salesman. And it stuck in his conscience. As he investigated, it led him to a female couple that lived in Key West, and one of them was the head of a accounting firm, and she was a very colorful character too. She had been brought up in Key West, and she lived there right across from the local cemetery there. She lived in what they call a shotgun house down there from the old days. They built them from front to back for air purposes. And as he was looking for an interview, he found that her home was empty, and he decided to go in and check it out because he had a funny suspicion she was involved with these murders. While in there, he ran into a little bit of trouble, but he finally talked himself out of it and talked his way out of it. This led him to another character who owned a series of businesses in the town. One was called a Rum Keg, and the other one was Barrow's Shops, and he felt some suspicion towards him also. These characters started to come together in his mind, and once in a while he found himself in a tight spot, and when he did, all of a sudden this character that he had met originally, the Cuban man, started to show up to help him. With further investigation, this led to one of the billionaires that he had been interviewing. And it wasn't the one that he really disliked, that he really wanted to pin this thing on. In the meantime, somebody else approached him, a gentleman that was a captain of one of the party boats, exceptionally good-looking man. And he had some information about his partner at one time who was killed, murdered also. That was, at the time, there was, going back into the 80s, there was a man down here there looking for buried treasure, and in this, anyway, he worked with this gentleman, as did his friend, and his friend ended up dead, and he felt that he was murdered, but it was brushed off at that time. So he felt that it had a tie-in with all these murders. As it goes on, he ends up dead. Now, he ends up dead in a very unusual place by Hayek Honda, which is a state resort, and he was buried in a shallow grave, so it was more or less to send a message rather than hide the body. As it went on, through his efforts, Roth ended up finding himself in another exotic area, which is Big Pine Key, which had one of the famous pubs, if you want to call it. It's a house. It was a no-name pub, and it's a very unique place. It's dollar bills cover the whole building inside. And he interviewed the bartender there to find out one of these culprits, the one that owned the shops in Key West, had a compound down there. Well, he got into there, and he got in there by in late evening, nobody around, and he was investigating the area, and he found some unusual schooners in there, and he found that the schooners had a lot of odd equipment. He didn't understand it himself, but as he went through the home, it was a large home, a mansion. As he went through that and searching through it, he had a feeling somebody was watching him, and he turned up a few oddities in there, a couple of coins that were gold, and doubloons that go back in time, and he turned up a manifest of some odd things. It just looked like nuts and bolts, but it looked like code to him, that it meant something. So anyway, he's putting all of this together, and he's still in confusion, and he's got bodies all around. He hasn't really made a conclusion as to who the culprit was as of yet. But he, as time went on, he did find, through his old friends, Cuban man, that helped him and steered him the right way when he was going the wrong way.
Hold that thought, John, because I want to interject. You've given a lot of information there for people.
Am I giving you too much? I don't know.
No, not necessarily. You're giving a lot, and I think that people are getting it. Slaughter on Houseboat Row. Yeah, you understand what the detective thriller is all about, my people of distinction listeners right now. And it's by John Patrick Sheehan. We're just giving it a pre-interview here on People of Distinction, a preview of that wonderful book. Now, one other thing I want you to get to, and get to it briefly, just a minute and a half or so. You had told me before the interview that the moral of your book, Slaughter on Houseboat Row, was the crime doesn't pay. Then again, sometimes it does. So just give us the clue in on that, how crime would pay in this particular case. And don't go into it too much. You can do it in, just a minute and a half. How does crime pay in Slaughter on Houseboat Row?
Well, why it doesn't pay is, number one, the culprits eventually get caught and brought to justice. Most of them, not all, but some of them end up dying. Others live on, and it brings Ross to a crossroad. And where it does pay is that it does help to relieve the find a boy innocent that he started out to. Mm-hmm. So that's a part of it. But another part of it is that there was benefits to this in gold itself. And that's in a way, some of the gold they never found. Mm-hmm. So in the end, they were turning up this treasure that's, we're talking almost $1 billion in treasure.
Wow.
And they found some, but they didn't find all of it. So, and that's one way it didn't pay. It did pay. Mm-hmm. It didn't pay for the original thieves, but it paid for others. Roth himself, it paid for his, it paid for him in a way where he came closer to the woman that he loved. Yeah. She was doubtful of him, but he proved to her that he was a good man.
Yeah. Now, you've given my listeners a lot to go on here with Slaughter on Houseboat Row. They're getting it, and you've done your job. You've talked about the plot, you've talked about some of the characters, and you've given us both how crime does not pay and also how it does pay, and you ended it on love. Yeah, so let me end it on love as well, capping off this great interview here, expose of your book, Slaughter on Houseboat Row. This goes out to my listening audience. Hey, people, now we know that crime doesn't pay, and even when it does, it pays dividends in very, very, very different ways, not necessarily moral ways. And John gets that too, John Patrick Sheehan, our special guest. And he did say that one of the ways it pays, it brought two people together a little bit more with love. Get that? Now, I know that my listeners listen for that on People of Distinction. Things that we can do to help elevate ourselves and elevate others through love, our family relationships, and then our community relationships and relationships to country. The final relationship is relationship to our human family. That's where the spirit really resides. We all have gone down the wrong road every once in a while. Sure, we've committed maybe minor crimes, things that maybe aren't even criminal when it comes down to legal considerations. Just, transgressions against this person, that person. And we can forgive that. And love is the greatest forgiver in the world. When we look at the heart and soul of human beings, we say to ourselves, wow, they're like us. We have much more in common than we have in difference. And with Slaughter on Houseboat Row, well, John is talking about some of the things we have in common, some of the things we have that really might be going a little bit overboard with the crime. But some of the human development here that we have in common, especially ending it with love. And if you want to read this book and find out the ending, well, you can order it when it comes out. It's still on pre-order right now, and we're just giving it that pre-interview. So Slaughter on Houseboat Row. Keep in touch with UR to find out when that book actually comes out and what the real ending to this is. And I think you're going to really love it. Go to urlinkpublishing.com to keep close to John Patrick Sheehan and his detective novel, Slaughter on Houseboat Row. Thank you so much, John, for being my special guest here today on People of Distinction. With Al Cole, we wish you all the very, very best with your book and everything else that you're doing in your life, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Al. I just hope I'm 10% as smooth as you are.
Ah, okay.